$5. The auctioneer said it twice because the first time no one answered, and the second time he said it the way a man says a number he is embarrassed to have reached. The girl stood on the porch of the Copper Falls poorhouse, with her wrists crossed in front of her and her chin up, and her feet bare on the November boards, bare in front of the whole town, because the county did not waste shoe leather on a pauper it was trying to be rid of. Snow had started. It collected on her shoulders and did not melt, which told anyone watching how cold she already was. $5 for the girl's keep and labor through the spring, the auctioneer called. Who will feed her cheaper than the county can? And from the back of the crowd, where the silent man always stood, a voice said one word. Done. If you have ever been counted up, marked down, and offered to the world at a price that was meant to shame you, then stay with me, because the man who paid that price is about to spend the rest of this story learning he got the better end of it, and so is the town. Comment the name of your city below. I want to see how far this story travels tonight. Now come back to Copper Falls, Montana, in the winter of 1886, to a pauper auction on a poorhouse porch, where a barefoot girl has just been sold for $5 to a man who has not spoken a full sentence to a living soul in 3 years. They called it a pauper auction, and it was a legal and ordinary thing in that county, which did not make it a decent one. When a person fell on the county, orphaned, widowed, ruined, too poor to keep themselves through a winter, the town did not feed them out of its own pocket if it could help it. It auctioned their keep. Whoever would board and feed the pauper for the lowest sum from the county treasury won the right to that person's labor until the term ran out. It was charity with the charity squeezed out of it. A low bid meant a hard winter for whoever was sold, because a man who has agreed to feed you for almost nothing will get his money's worth out of your back. The girl's name was Eliza Wren, and she was 20 years old, and 3 weeks ago she had buried her father. He had been a tinsmith, a good one, a gentle man who had taught her the trade with his own hands because he had no sons and saw no reason a daughter could not learn it. They had come west 2 years back chasing work that the railroad had promised, and then taken away. He had taken a fever in October and been gone in 9 days, and the rent had been owed, and the landlord had taken the tools and the wagon and the very lasts and hammers Eliza could have used to keep them both, and sold them against the debt. And so a girl who could mend a kettle or solder a seam or beat a dented pot back true, a girl with a real trade in her 2 hands, had been put on the county as a pauper, because no one in Copper Falls would hire a woman to do a tinsmith's work, and there was no other kind of work she had. She had stood on that porch and felt the whole town measure her. She had felt that look her entire life, the slow up and down accounting that began at the face and traveled down without hurry, deciding what a body was worth. She was not a small woman. She had been a big, strong, broad-handed girl, built for the bellows and the anvil, and the town had always made her feel that her size was one more thing she ought to apologize for, on top of being poor, on top of being female, on top of now being barefoot in the snow. She had heard them as the bidding stalled. Look at the size of her, she'll eat more than she earns. Laughter. $5 and she's still no bargain. More laughter. Eliza Wren did not lower her chin. She had learned a long time ago that flinching only told them they had landed the blow. She stood in the snow in her bare feet and looked straight out over their heads at the mountains, and she waited to find out who had bought her. The man who came up the steps did not look at the crowd, and the crowd went quiet for him, which told her something before he ever reached her. He was tall and weathered, somewhere past 40, with 3 years of silence on him like dust that would not brush off. He paid the clerk the bond in coin without a word. Then he looked at her bare feet, and something crossed his face and was gone, and he took off his own coat, a heavy sheepskin thing, still warm from him, and he put it around her shoulders, in front of the entire town that had just laughed at her, and he said, low, only to her, "Can you walk to the wagon, or do you need carrying?" "I can walk," Eliza said. "Then walk," he said. And that was the second thing Silas Brant had said out loud in Copper Falls in longer than most people could remember, and he turned and went down the steps, and she followed him through the snow in his coat that hung to her knees, and the town watched them go. She learned the rest of him from the stagecoach driver, of all people, who shared the road out of town with them for the first mile before his route turned off. "Brant," the driver said to her, quiet, while Silas saw to a trace up ahead. "You could have done worse, miss, and that's the truth, though I know it don't feel like it. Man hasn't been right since the slide." He glanced at her. "Avalanche, 3 winters back, up on his own grade. Took his wife and his boy both. They were out at the woodpile, and the whole slope came down. He dug for 2 days. Found him on the 3rd. The driver shook his head. He stopped talking after. Pays fair, keeps his word. Never raised his voice nor his hand to a soul that I heard. He's not cruel, miss. He's just froze through. Some men, the cold gets all the way in and don't come back out." He clicked at his team. "Last thing, he didn't buy you to work you. I've been driving this county 16 years, and Silas Brant never bid at a pauper auction in his life till today. You figure out why, and you'll have figured him out." Eliza did not answer, but she pulled the warm coat tighter, and she thought about it the whole long climb up the grade. The place, when they reached it, told her the rest the driver had left unsaid. It was a good ranch gone to silence, solid house, solid barn, good land under the snow, and over all of it the particular neglect of a man who had stopped seeing surfaces, because the people who cared about surfaces were under 3 winters of avalanche debris up the slope. A shutter hung crooked. The garden was a memory under the white, and on the porch there were 2 small things she did not understand until later. A child's sled, half buried, and a woman's wash bench, both left exactly where they had been the day the mountain came down. Neither one used nor moved nor able to be moved, the way grief leaves things. He showed her the house in a handful of sentences. Here was the stove. Here was the loft, which would be hers. He kept the room below. Here was the pantry, near empty. "You'll board through the spring," he said, "same as the county paper says. You eat what I eat. There's no work I'll force on you." He stopped at the door, his back to her. "I didn't buy you to break your back, whatever the town thinks. I bought you, because nobody else was going to put a coat on you, and I couldn't stand in that snow and watch it." It was the longest thing he had said in 3 years, and it seemed to cost him. And he went out to the barn before she could find a single word to answer it with. She stood alone in the house. The kitchen was the worst of it, the stove crusted black, the flour gone to weevil, the smell of old ash, and a man who had stopped caring whether anything smelled like anything because the woman who would have minded was gone. She did not weep. She found a bucket. She began. But within 3 days, Eliza Wren had found the thing in that house that no cook could have found, because she was not a cook. She was a tinsmith's daughter, and a tinsmith's daughter sees metal. The stove drew badly and smoked the room and ate twice the wood it should. Anyone could tell that much. But Eliza took the stovepipe down and looked at it the way her father had taught her, and she found the flue choked with 3 years of creosote and, worse, a seam in the pipe gone open, and a damper warped clean out of true, the kind of fault that wastes half a man's firewood and fills his house with smoke and, on the wrong night, kills him in his sleep. There were no tinsmith's tools on the place, so she made do. She cut and folded and crimped with what was in the barn, and she rebuilt the damper, and she soldered the seam true with a heated iron and a bit of pewter spoon she begged off him. And when she lit the stove again, it drew clean and hot and silent, and the room warmed on half the wood it had eaten before, and the smoke went up the pipe where smoke belongs. Silas Brant stood in the doorway and watched a barefoot pauper he had bought for $5 fix the thing that had been slowly poisoning his house for 3 winters, and he did not say anything, because he had forgotten how to say the size of what he was feeling. But that night there was a stack of firewood by the kitchen door taller than the day required, and a pair of his dead son's boots, cleaned and softened, set just inside it, too big for her. But she stuffed the toes with wool and wore them, and neither of them said a word about the boots, not then and not ever. That was the beginning of it. She did not stay a cook, and she had never been one. She was a maker, a mender, a fixer of broken things, and a house 3 years frozen had no shortage of broken things. She mended the crooked shutter and trued the barn door that had hung tired on its hinge so long the wood had set to the slope of it. She beat the dents out of every pot in the place and made them hold water again. She built a tin reflector for the lamp so a person could read by it, though there was no one in that house who read, until she found the boy's primer on a shelf and understood there had been. Each thing she fixed silently, unannounced, asking no thanks and waiting for none. She had not been hired. She had been bought. She owed the work. But somewhere in the doing of it, it had stopped being work owed and become something closer to a conversation between 2 people who could not yet manage one out loud. And Silas began to surface. Slowly, the way the ground comes back in spring, first only at the table, staying longer after the meal than the meal required. Then a word. Then 2. Then, one evening, watching her solder a cracked lantern by lamplight, he said the things she had been waiting, without waiting to hear. "My boy would have loved to watch you do that," he said. Caleb, he was 9. The fire popped. Wanted to make things his whole short life. I never had the patience to teach him. His hands had gone still. His mother's name was Ruth. They were at the woodpile. I was in the barn. He stopped. The next words came out flat and terrible and quiet. I heard it come down. By the time I dug to them, it was the 3rd day. I've not had much use for talking since. There wasn't anybody left I wanted to say anything to. Eliza Wren did not go to him and did not touch him and did not tell him it was not his fault, because he had surely heard that from every soul in the county, and it had never once helped. She set down the lantern. She put a log on the fire so the room would not go cold. And then she said, because she was a maker and it was the only true comfort she had to give, "Then we'll teach the next one patience for both of you. I'll show whoever comes how the seam wants to lie flat before you wet it." That's all your boy wanted, somebody with the patience to show him how the broken thing wants to go back together. She let that sit. There's worse things to leave behind than a house full of mended things. Mr. Brant, a person could build a whole life next to that. He did not answer. But something in the room had changed and would not change back. The trouble came down the mountain with the first thaw, the way it always does. The county clerk who had taken Silas's bond had a brother, and the brother was a man named Harlan Voss, who ran the freight and the feed and half the paper in Copper Falls, and Harlan Voss had wanted the Brant grade for 2 years, the timber on it, and the water. He came up the road in April in a good buggy with the clerk beside him and a paper in his coat, and he stood in the yard and explained, with great courtesy, that there had been an irregularity. The pauper bond Silas had signed in November bound him to board the girl and provide for her keep. But it had bound him, Voss said, smiling, as her guardian and master for the term, and a master who shared a roof with an unmarried young woman of no family, who let her labor at a man's trade and a man's boots, who kept her up the mountain alone with him. Well, there were people in town who called that something other than charity. There was a petition got up. The county might be persuaded to void the bond, remove the girl as a ward of questionable keeping, and find Mr. Brandt's fitness to hold any county contract, or the grade he held under one, a matter for the court to weigh. Unless, of course, the matter could be settled. He named his price. It was the grade. Silas Brandt stood very still, and Eliza saw his fists close, and she saw 3 years of held-down grief turn to something hot and dangerous behind his eyes, and she watched him put it down by main force. Because a man who breaks a county official's nose in his own yard loses everything the official came to take. "The hearing's the 1st of May, Voss said pleasantly. "In Copper Falls." "I'd think hard, Brandt," and he drove away. That night Silas did not eat. He sat on the porch in the cold beside the sled that had not moved in 3 years, and Eliza let him be until she could not. And she came and sat in the other chair, uninvited. "I'll sign myself back to the county," she said. "Tonight, let them take me off the bond and there's nothing left for him to hold over you. I won't be the reason you lose your land." And Silas Brandt turned and looked at her and said the longest thing she had ever heard from him. "You'll do no such thing," he said. "I bought you for $5, and the whole town laughed, and they were right about one thing: it was the worst trade I ever made. I got far more than I paid for, and I've got no way on earth to make it square." His voice broke and held. 3 years I've not drawn a clean breath in that house. You came and fixed the flue, and I slept the night through for the first time since the slide, and I didn't even know that thing had been killing me slow. You fixed every broken thing on this place. You're the only one of them that's still broken. He looked at the sled, then at her. "I'm not handing you back to that county to save a stand of timber. The land's just land. Marry me, and Voss has got no irregularity to point at, and I've got—" He stopped, started plainer. "I've got a reason to keep drawing the breath." They were married the 3rd week of April, quietly, in the front room, and Eliza soldered her own ring out of a melted silver dollar, because a tinsmith's daughter marries in metal she has worked herself, and she would not have had it any other way. The 1st of May came, and half of Copper Falls turned out at the courthouse, because a silent man who might lose his land and the pauper girl he'd married is precisely the kind of story a town will leave its work to see. Harlan Voss sat with a clerk and a lawyer and told the court of the irregular bond, the unfit guardianship. The girl kept up a mountain doing a man's labor. The questionable household. He told it well, and then, to seal it, the lawyer asked the court to consider what trade, what skill, what earthly value this pauper could possibly have had, that an honest county should have entrusted her to such a keeping, meaning to make the $5 price the proof of her worthlessness, in front of the whole town that had set it. That was when Silas Brandt— he had not strung 10 words together in public in 3 years, and he used the ones he had now, plain, on his feet, in the Copper Falls courthouse, in front of every soul who had laughed on that poorhouse porch. He did not make a speech. Men like him do not make speeches. He looked at the judge, and he said, "You want to know what trade she has." He set something on the rail of the witness box, the rebuilt damper, the soldered seam of stovepipe, the trued lantern, things she had not known he'd brought, carried down the mountain in a grain sack. "She's a tinsmith, a better one than the man you ran out of this county for, being a woman doing it. That flue she fixed had been venting smoke into my house 3 winters. The doctor here will tell you what that does to a man over 3 winters. A breath. You sold her for $5 because not one of you could see a trade standing right in front of you in bare feet. I saw it. She's my wife. The work on this rail is hers, and any man who still thinks $5 was the measure of her is welcome to come up my grade and look at the house she put back together. He sat down. It was more than anyone in Copper Falls had heard Silas Brant say in 3 years, and it was enough. The judge was not a fool. And a courthouse rail full of fine, true, hand-worked tin is a hard thing for a lawyer to argue against. He found the bond properly discharged by the marriage, found no irregularity in a man marrying the woman he'd freed from the county, and found Harlan Voss's sudden interest in the Brant grade to be exactly what it looked like. He dismissed the petition before noon and let it be known that the next pauper auction in his county had best produce a higher bid than $5 for a person, or there'd be questions. Harlan Voss left on the afternoon stage. The town that had laughed on the poorhouse porch watched Eliza Wren Brant walk down the courthouse steps in dead boy's boots stuffed with wool, with her husband's hand at her back, and understood, all at once, what it had marked down to $5 and tried to be rid of. They drove back up the grade that evening, with the aspens just coming green, and Silas stopped the wagon once on the rise where the valley opened gold below them, and he said, "Worst $5 I ever spent." He let it hang. "Never got such a return on money in my life. Half the county's tinware'll be coming up this mountain to be mended by August, and they'll pay you a sight more than $5, and they'll have to be civil about it too." Eliza Wren laughed out loud, surprised it out of herself, and the sound startled a jay out of an aspen, and Silas Brant, who folks would have sworn had forgotten how, almost smiled, and then went ahead and did. 19 years later, the sign over the shop on the main street of Copper Falls read Wren and Brant, tinsmiths, and the second name on it belonged to their son, who had his father's quiet and his mother's hands and the patience, his mother always said, that an uncle he never met would have envied. The Brant grade kept its timber and its water. The sled came down off the porch at last and was given to a child to use the way a sled is meant to be used, and the wash bench saw wash again, and the broken things in that house got mended one by one until the house itself was no longer one of the broken things. The flue drew clean every winter, and every cold morning Eliza fired the stove she had saved them both with, and the heat of it filled the house, and there were always children to warm their hands at it. Eliza Wren Brant never once apologized for the space she took up in this world, nor for the trade in her 2 hands, nor for the price a frightened town had once tried to shame her with. She had been stood barefoot in the snow and offered for $5 to whoever would feed her cheapest, told by the whole of Copper Falls exactly what they reckoned she was worth. They had reckoned wrong, every one of them. She had been worth more than the grade and the timber and the water and the whole town that auctioned her. And the silent man who bought her had known it the moment he climbed those steps and put his coat on her shoulders. Had known he was not the buyer in that trade at all, but the thing being saved. She had always been enough. The price had only ever measured the people who said it.